The period between 2100 and 1450 BCE was a time when the Minoan civilization was at its height. Lavish palace centers were erected across Crete, projecting unprecedented wealth. The Minoan language became the first in Europe to be written down on the still undeciphered Cretan hieroglyphics and the linear A scripts. While not exactly known as warlike, especially compared to their Bronze Age contemporaries, the Minoans were nevertheless able to spread their cultural and commercial dominance over the Aegean Sea and expand their robust trade network across the Mediterranean. Here, we talk about the Cretan military, the army and the navy of the Minoan civilization. By the end of the 4th millennium BCE, what was once a Neolithic culture of Crete evolved into what we today know as Minoan civilization. The period of the following 1000 years corresponds to the pre-palatial phase of the Minoans. In this period, their chief settlements such as Knossos and Phaistos, among others, gradually progressed into some of the most important Aegean commercial centers. By mid to late 3rd millennium, the Minoans developed their writing system, initially based on the Cretan hieroglyphics, and later more famously believed to be written on the linear A script. The writing system was likely used for commercial and administrative purposes, given that the Minoan civilization saw unprecedented increase in wealth accumulated through trade. This was made possible by Crete's favorable geographic location, being the chief sea trade spot between the great Bronze Age civilizations to its south and east, Greek mainland to the north, and the rest of the Mediterranean to the west. Such wealth, by the end of the millennium, allowed the Minoans to build monumental palaces across their island, such as those at Knossos, Phaistos, Zakros, Malia, and Gurnia. They were also able to expand beyond Crete. Aegean culture of the Cycladic Islands was incorporated into the Minoan trade network, with the site of Akrotiri on the island of Thera first becoming the chief Minoan trading outpost in the region. Soon enough, Akrotiri too became home to a lavish and wealthy Minoan palace, the chief Minoan settlement outside Crete itself. Another trading post was founded on the coast of Asia Minor, the city of Miletus. Many other outposts were built across the Aegean, Minoan presence likely reaching the coastal parts of Peloponnese and shaping the whole region into an image of the wealthy and prosperous culture of the Minoans. When it comes to warfare, the Minoans are mostly considered to be peaceful and benevolent civilization by the scholars. This is chiefly due to the lack of concrete evidence of their military activity, but also due to the apparent absence of the culture of war among them. Their art, architecture, and overall society seems to be disproportionately focused on beauty, nature, wealth, religious and sporting ceremonies, and other things which are not warfare. Depictions of battles are very rare. If we compare this with any other contemporary culture of the Bronze Age, we will see that all other civilizations are much more active and descriptive when it comes to war. Now, it is hard to imagine that such expansion would be possible without ever using any kind of force. Minoans were in fact very wealthy, far wealthier than most of their neighbors. But even for them, just showing up and getting permission to build ports, towns, and palaces everywhere they wanted was not possible without resistance from at least some of the local polities. That's where the Minoan military enters the picture, especially the Minoan navy. Despite warfare not being prominently included in the Minoan art, there are still some depictions of the Minoan soldiers, ships, and even battle scenes. In fact, we do know that the Minoan soldiers in their appearance and equipment influenced the later and much more famous Mycenaean military. Boar-tusk helmets, large shields, and long spears all do appear on the depictions of the Minoan infantry. Figure-8 shields and bronze armor were also prominent, as were other types of the Aegean helmets. Swords and daggers were used for close combat. When it comes to the famed Minoan XX, it is unknown if it was actually used in warfare or only served for ceremonies and similar purposes. The double axe is heavily included in the Minoan symbolism outside warfare, such as the religious ceremonies and festivals. Besides infantry, Minoans used bows, slings, and javelins. Archery had a long-established tradition on Crete, which continued on long after the Minoans, spanning into classical, Hellenistic, Roman, and even medieval times. Minoans themselves used both simple and curved bows from very early on. Depictions of their archery variously appear on frescoes, mosaics, and seals throughout all Minoan periods. When it comes to the chariots, the Minoans did use them, both for hunting and ceremonies, and for war. Chariot warfare was likely introduced in the Aegean in about 17th century BCE, at the time of the New Palace period on Crete. Minoan chariots were of the Aegean type, just like those of the Mycenaeans. They were lighter in comparison to the heavy Hittite chariots and those of the Near East. Minoan usage and reliance on chariots was likely limited, most likely because Crete was not land but a naval power. The geography of the Aegean Sea meant that precious resources were much better spent by building a strong navy rather than large contingents of chariots. This brings us to the key part of the Minoan military, their formidable navy. Considering that most of the Minoan power and influence was centered around their sea trade, a strong fleet was necessary to protect Minoan holdings and outposts across the Aegean islands. The word thalassocracy was coined and first used by the ancient Greeks to describe the Minoan system of government. A maritime empire that was maintained through its naval supremacy over the Aegean. In Greek mythology, the powerful Cretan navy was attributed to legendary king Minos. He was said to be the first person to build a navy, which he used to dominate the Aegean islands in the dim past. Although it is unknown if historical Minos ever existed, and although the timeline of Greek mythology does not necessarily align with the historical Minoan navy, it is nevertheless apparent that the ancient Greeks did preserve a memory of a naval Cretan hegemony realized through its powerful navy. The ships used by the Minoans varied greatly depending on the time period in question. The early types, such as Type 2 Platanus cluster, can be found on the Minoan seals and sealstones going back to the early Minoan period. Given the nature of these depictions, it is difficult to tell whether there was any difference between a warship and a regular galley. The soldiers also served as oarsmen, as shown in fragments of a Type 3 Aegean ship. They carried their weapons with them, ready to engage in either projectile battle with their javelins, or close melee combat with spears. Type 4 ships are dated to the late Minoan, to the New Palace period. We see on the frescoes that these are much more lavishly decorated, often transporting nobles, possibly the royals and other people of higher status. Besides sets of regular oars, these ships included one large steering oar to better manage the movement. There was also a special cabin in the back of the ship, where either the captain or possibly a Minoan ruler or another high official was seated. These ships were built in a great variety of different sizes and luxuriously decorated, presumably depending on the status of passengers they transported. The earliest attested sea battle was also depicted on a Minoan fresco. The Akrotiri West House Room 5 fresco portrays a naval engagement where a Minoan fleet defeats an enemy force and subsequently marches on the shore in triumph. The naval supremacy of the Minoans lasted until the 15th century BCE. By that time, a new rising power dominated the Greek mainland and was expanding towards the Aegean Islands and Crete itself. The mighty Mycenaeans eventually became the new masters of the Aegean and conquered Crete between 1450 and the later part of the century. What was once a great Minoan civilization of Crete became a part of the Mycenaean Greece, the greatest Aegean power of the late Bronze Age. What remained of the Minoans were the Cretan people, culture, art, architecture, and technological achievements that shaped the Mycenaeans themselves, but also all of their Hellenic successors to come.